Chris, hello.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for being here. I can't tell you how much I appreciate it.
Of course, I'm grateful for you for having me on.
It's honestly your voice to be here on this topic. So I recently changed the title of the podcast from Lessons in Love to Lessons in Attachment. So the timing for you to be here is great as well. But yeah, to have your voice here to talk to us about attachment, I'm really, really honored because I've listened to you as a guest on podcasts, actually how I found you. Um, and so just makes me feel so good to think that that's going to be on my podcast.
Oh my goodness, thank you. That is so sweet. And I'm happy to hear that, I'm making an impact. That's why I got into doing attachment work is, I struggled with it for many years with anxious attachment and to know that people are hearing my voice, watching my videos, reading my blogs and books and yeah, it means the world to me. So thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I will, of course, get you to introduce yourself properly. But I do just want to say, because I do really choose who to have on the podcast, I always have, just based on just what speaks to me, to be honest. And I know
Hmm.
I shared this with you already, but I first heard you on another podcast. And honestly, I do think that your message is quite standout. And I know it is on social media as well, but just you delivered it just brilliantly, everything, and I'm sure that's what today will be like. um
Thank you. I
However,
wish I could give you a hug.
but I listen to it just for me because I still listen to attachment stuff and all of those things. I'm probably thought at the time, oh, I should like just dive into who this person is a little bit more, and invite you on the podcast. However, I just put that episode away and on I went with my life. But over the next like 3 months, I definitely kept having thoughts of, oh, I need to go back out or go back to that episode and like find you. So I remember on the day I did go onto your TikTok and things like that, but then that was kind of it. And then this is the bit
Hmm.
where I told you this, but I was out for coffee one morning with my friend, and that morning as I was getting ready, it was like it got to action. I was like, okay, need to go back to that episode today, find your details and contact you to be on the podcast. And because you obviously just stayed with me. And then I swear I was out for coffee that morning. It was within about 2 to 3 hours, and I got an email from people, booking for podcasts. And I thought when it says like, oh, a guest for your podcast, I knew. I honestly thought I just knew in my everything about me was like, I know it's going to be him. And obviously I had to go back and check and do all that, but it was you. And I was just like, absolutely, like your people got in touch. Um, and yeah, I didn't need to take that bit of action that was on my mind. So you being here for me, it was like this real synchronicity.
Yes, I use the same word to describe that experience. And it, for me, is always a reminder I'm on the right track, I'm in the right place, and so I really pay very close attention to those moments. But the universe brought us together.
Yeah, honestly, it was so weird. It's like I thought of you and within 2 hours. So would you, yeah, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about what you do,
Of
and then
course.
if you don't mind as well, telling us a little bit about your love story.
Yes, absolutely. So, for those listening, my name is Chris Rackcliffe, or watching. I'm Chris Rackcliffe. I'm an anxious attachment style coach. So, I work specifically with folks who are on the insecure side of the attachment spectrum and experience intense anxiety in their interpersonal relationships, a fear of abandonment, needing a lot of reassurance and closeness, a lot of clarity, folks who tend to have experienced trauma bonds or codependent bonds, folks that tend to self sacrifice and self sabotage, and really helping them to learn one, how to take better care of themselves, two, how to not engage in protest behavior. So, ways of being in relation with others that are healthier, more direct, more compassionate, clearer. So I help clients all over the globe. I've worked with folks on 5 continents now, from Australia to Asia, all over the US and Europe. So keep in mind, this is also super common. And it's just been incredibly fulfilling for me because, as I mentioned earlier, I struggled with anxious attachment for years. My first trauma was when I was 2 years old, when my parents divorced. I also experienced sexual abuse, a lot of death, there's addiction in my family. I've been cheated on. I talk about all of these things in my book, It's Good to See Me Again, which is really, it's not about attachment per se, but it's about all of the things that led to me and also reinforced my sense of having an anxious attachment style. And so finding out about my attachment style was a game changing moment for me, a true watershed light bulb realization that gave a name to a phenomenon and an experience that was deeply painful for me. You know, I thought I was crazy, needy, clingy, that there was something wrong with me legitimately, that I was the only one struggling in this way, thriving professionally, but crying myself to sleep multiple nights a week, not knowing how to communicate properly. And, you know, realizing that it was connected to all of that instability and trauma and abuse that I had experienced as a child and had only reinforced for myself as an adult was very affirming in a way that it's hard to use words to describe. It gave this name to something that, you know, was an experience that I I mean, I legitimately don't know if I would be here today if I didn't find that out. So I made a commitment in that moment to not stop talking about attachment theory and attachment styles because it was so transformative for me. And, you know, I just started consuming as much as I could about it, learning as much as I could. Of course, my healing journey is still unfolding, right? As a coach, I'm very honest about where I'm at in my healing. Now, I would say I'm about 75% secure, maybe 25% anxious. I still experience anxiety, but my relationship to my body, my nervous system, my needs, the way that I communicate, all of my relationships, vastly different from what it was. And now I'm sharing with my clients, you know, what I picked up along the way, and we see what sticks. We build a toolkit for them that works. So that's kind of where, you know, I'm at now. In terms of love, I used to think love was dependency. You know, I used to think love was enmeshment, the idea that's really been sold to all of us since birth through our culture and our media, whether it's movies or music or television. And over the years, I've really changed my perspective on love and romantic relationships in particular. I don't over romanticize people anymore. I know that the other person is a human being with their own wounds and their own past and history. I look at love as freedom, a freedom to be myself, truly, really, to say how I feel in a way, of course, that I'm being emotionally mature about and bringing other people into my experience. But experiencing it nonetheless, not invalidating myself anymore or beating myself up for being needy, but realizing we all have emotional needs. I changed the way I talk to myself. You know, learning to love myself has been a journey and it's still unfolding, of course. I don't love myself every minute of every day, of course. Who does? I don't know anyone that loves themselves unconditionally at every point or every turn, but love to me has started to represent more freedom. And, you know, that also means freedom for the other person to be who they are, for me to not project my expectations of them and expect them to be the partner that my exes couldn't be, or the parent that my parents couldn't be for me. That's transformative for people to realize. They cannot fill the void in your mind that you create when you go through a traumatic experience or experiences and you personalize those. Way easier to take on the burden of that discomfort and to say to yourself, well, there must be something wrong with me for me having been treated that way. That level of personalizing, though, while it will give you an illusion of control, is false. And any void that we create in our minds by telling ourselves there's something missing, there's something wrong with me, it is insatiable, and you will search the rest of your life trying to fill it. I know this because I did it for many years, trying to do it through sex, through drinking, through dating, and it never worked because the void wasn't real. And I talk about a lot of this in my book, It's Good to See Me Again. And I obviously incorporate this into my anxious attachment coaching. But freedom is what love is all about to me. I want the other person to be able to communicate with me about how they're feeling, to know that they are safe here, that I'm not going to get upset with them if they, share something with me. I'm always going to positively reinforce anyone who's being vulnerable and sharing their emotions with me because I know how deeply difficult it can be already to open up, even if you are quote unquote secure, or if you're more secure on the more secure side of the attachment spectrum.
Mhm.
So that's how I would define love and what I'm, focusing on in terms of making an impact in the world now. I don't want people to struggle in the same ways that I did. I don't want them to waste years of their lives like I did. I really wish I would have found out about attachment theory sooner. And I have a degree in psychology. I knew about this stuff, and yet it didn't click until, my mid to late 20s. Although, of course, my healing was unfolding prior to that because you realize on some level something's not right. The rubber's not meeting the road. My relationships aren't healthy. I don't feel fulfilled. So that's a bit of what brought me to where I am today and how I would define love today.
Thank you so much. I also did a psychology degree and completely relate to that. I have to say, I do remember before going to university doing my A levels here, and I was doing psychology, and I do remember looking in a textbook. I know the classroom I was sat in, and I do remember thinking, like, oh shit, like that, am I in trouble? And then just forgot. And just went and did like my 20s with my attachment was felt very crazy, felt crazy.
Yeah.
Something that happened for me much later on in more recent years, actually, and I believe is one of the reasons why I'm now in a relation, have been able to sustain a relationship, is exactly that idea of their freedom as well. And I
Yeah.
don't know that I really understood that. I think in the past, I was still coming at that from just trying to think of them and put them above me, when I try not to reach out because I'm so worried about what they think. Whereas now it's almost like it's the same thing, but it comes from this different place of I remember the early stages of being with my partner and he was out for drinks with his friends. And I remember thinking like, you're allowed to do that and he's fine with that. Do you not want him to have that freedom as well? And it was the word freedom, but sometimes I think does that conflict with the typical avoidant of I just want my freedom.
Mm,
How do we find
yes.
that balance between knowing the difference when we're doing it because of this space that I find it difficult to put verbalize to you, but I know that it feels more supportive and it feels healthy versus giving them space to try and not be needy?
Mm. Well, I like to think of attachment as a form of survival because for many of us, it really was and often is. It comes from a place of urgency. So whenever you're feeling that discomfort in the body, the shallow breathing, the sweaty palms, the racing thoughts, the tightness in the chest and your throat, your body is telling you that you feel a threat, that you perceive a threat in the environment. And this comes up all the time in my coaching work with clients where for clients who are in interpersonal relationships, romantic ones, their significant other will go out for drinks or hang out with their friends and they feel really triggered by that. I always validate for folks it is normal to experience one, separation anxiety, because that's a core component of anxious attachment. We seek enmeshment. When we're separated, it's obvious that that would come in conflict with that enmeshment. But enmeshment is not realistic. It doesn't take into account someone's career, their dreams, their hopes, their fears, their family, their friends. They have a life that existed before you, and you cannot be their end all be all. It is not realistic or healthy to expect that. And when we do, of course, our corresponding hopes for the relationship will be unrealistic and also unhealthy to want to spend all of our time with them. But keep in mind, this comes from a space of abandonment. We don't want to lose them, so we latch onto them. But the more you latch on, the more likely it is that you will lose them because no one likes that pressure. No one can sustain, again, being your end all be all. And this idea of putting someone else on a pedestal or focusing on them is something many of us learned in unstable environments growing up. We had to feel into the room because we didn't know how someone was going to be for us, whether or not they were going to meet our needs, whether or not they were going to yell at us or invalidate us. Happens all the time, and there's countless examples. But keep in mind, at any given time, we are bouncing back between two different polarities, and that is a space of independence and a space of interdependence. And for folks who are on the anxious side of things, they are overly skewed towards interdependence to the point of that interdependence becoming codependence.
Mm.
And so the work for the anxious folks is to learn to grow more independent. You have to bring the focus back to you. You have to learn to value your own time. You have to have hobbies and passions and interests. You have to continue to do what I call emotionally diversify, or to make sure that your romantic relationship isn't the only source of emotional well being in your life. It cannot be the only relationship that you have. Can it be an important one? Absolutely. Yes. Romantic relationships are a place where we can experience deep warmth and deep validation. And for anxious attachers, we crave that most. But the way we go about it is unhealthy because, first and foremost, we're self abandoning. We're not taking good care of ourselves when we meet folks that we feel a quote unquote connection or chemistry with. We instantly rule out all other dating prospects because, we think, oh, well, finally I'm connecting with someone, because oftentimes we feel it's difficult to find people like that. We are naturally approaching romantic relationships from a place of lack, both in self and in the environment. And so you can see why this just creates a perfect storm where you meet someone, you get swept up in the chemistry, the butterflies, the fireworks of it all. All of a sudden, you're spending all of your time with them. You're not going to the gym. You're not hanging out with your friends. You can barely focus at work. And that is a signal that you need to slow down, adjust, and take better care of yourself. Your body isn't accustomed to experiencing that kind of lack. Although for many of us, it is familiar and we seek it out unconsciously. It's not good for the body, it's not sustainable. I use this metaphor for clients all the time where anxious attachment is the gas pedal, right? We're pedal to the metal. We want to get to the commitment as soon as we can, lock it down. That means they're not going to leave. Of course, that's not true. That is a fallacy. People can leave at any time. And on the break side of things, that's the avoidant. They're slowing down, they're preventing intimacy, they're building more space. They can only handle so much emotional risk and exposure. So they're the break. But both are going to the extremes of these two polarities. One is too hyper independent, the other is hyper interdependent. That hyper state is not healthy or sustainable, and it prevents real connection from happening. Connection has to come from a space of adding to your life, not grasping onto someone because you're afraid of losing them. Anything created in fear perpetuates fear. It's a self fulfilling prophecy, always. If you approach a connection in your life, whether it's romantic or otherwise, from a space of fear, you will behave in such a way that oftentimes brings about the very outcome you are seeking to avoid. I did a video on this on TikTok that got almost 100,000 likes. A fear of abandonment is a self fulfilling prophecy because you will first abandon yourself. You have to learn to grow more independent and emotionally diversifying, learning to regulate your nervous system, learning to prioritize safe relationships in your life, which is one of the best ways to regulate your nervous system, is imperative. But that's how you do the work. You have to grow more independent if you're on the anxious side. If you're on the avoidant side, you have to grow more interdependent, realizing that opening up, being honest about how you feel, allowing people in, depending on others, that doesn't make you weak. It's one of the best, most satisfying parts of life. And if you float through life being a lone wolf or overly dependent on others, you won't ever know true connection. You won't know the freedom that we're talking about. So you have to identify when you're in that hyperactive state, one way or the other. You have to listen to your body and slow down long enough to know I'm repeating this pattern. And you have to give your body what it is that it needs. You don't just have to get that from a romantic partner.
No, well, that speaks to me so much because one of the realizations for myself, and it was, similar in the sense of a very chaotic childhood, no surprise.
Right.
And I just remember kind of feeling, hold on, and I say this, I'll explain this. The thought of that's not fair, not getting stuck there, but accepting, you know what, it wasn't fair. And so now I'm an adult, now it's my responsibility, right? And I just thought, no, in my lifetime, I want to experience healthy love. Like, I really want the opportunity to experience it, even if childhood was as it was. And there was something in that for me, like, okay, so I need to do the work to give myself like the best shot at being able to experience a healthy, secure love. I know you believe in the ability to move from insecure, secure as well. And now I
Yes.
really do, more than ever now, I really, really do. And so one of my messages is like everyone deserves to experience that. And I do just all the work like that you're doing that I'm going to dive into a little bit more. But there is something I just wanted to ask you, and I know we've touched on this already, but I'm just thinking of where people are at when they're probably listening to this podcast.
Hmm.
And I was wondering if you could describe anxious attachment as if it is the first time someone's hearing about it, or as if you were explaining what it's actually like in those moments where we're literally in it. Like, how would you describe those moments?
Anxious attachment when you are in a triggered state, or when, for instance, you described earlier your significant others going out for drinks with friends, or you don't hear back from a dating prospect or a friend or your partner romantically for hours or maybe even days. It is incredibly triggering. Most and many triggers come from a space of communication and clarity for anxious attachers. So when you're activated, you have a visceral response in your body. Your system, your container does not feel safe. And what ends up happening is, like I was describing earlier, there's the tightening of the chest and the throat, the racing thoughts, not knowing what to do, thinking that you're too much. This is a cycle of invalidation that we go through. It's nervous system dysregulation. Dysregulation just means that we feel overwhelmed. We don't really know how to cope in those moments. Anxious attachers haven't learned how to cope with rejection, space, a lack of certainty or clarity or communication. Again, because for many of us, it triggers environments that were very wounding from early on in our lives. And by the way, it doesn't have to be like big T trauma, like a death or a divorce or, actual like physical loss of someone. Sometimes it's just invalidation that adds up over time. Sometimes it's a parent that can't hold space for you, is too busy, doesn't really inquire about your emotions, or environments growing up where emotions aren't discussed. That tends to create anxious attachment. Anxious attachment is a result of imprints on your nervous system that tell you, I can't open up about how I feel. I'm too much. And it's not always that the parents are to blame. Many parents are doing the best they can with the knowledge they have and the healing tools that they have, and many have none at all.
Mm-hmm.
So, that said, it is about how the child interprets it, always about how they feel. If you don't feel safe, your body will internalize that and it creates a conditioned response, which is I'm going to shut down, or I'm too much, I'm going to withdraw. You don't end up speaking up about how you feel. You don't even really have labels for how you feel. These are coping mechanisms. We dissociate from the experiences in our bodies when we don't learn that it's safe for us to experience those feelings. This
Mm.
is a process of attunement that is supposed to happen from a caregiver or a parent to a child, for them to sit with you and say, "Sweetheart, how are you feeling? Are you okay? What's going on? You seem hurt. How can I help?" Being available to a child emotionally teaches them to label their feelings, to talk about their feelings. That process of attunement for folks on the insecure side of the attachment spectrum rarely happens.
Mm.
So, that lack of attunement means that as an adult, no, it's not your fault, but yes, as you said, it is your responsibility. The trauma you experienced is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to deal with your triggers, to learn to be more emotionally secure as an adult, to do the work of completing stress cycles in your body, of finishing trauma arcs in your story. That is critical for this work. But anxious attachers feel they're too much or not good enough. They have visceral survival responses in the body that overwhelm them. And they can go on for days being triggered in this place, crying, not being able to sleep or eat. It is exhausting, it is paralyzing. And one of the biggest fears at the core of the anxious attachment style that people don't talk about enough is stagnation. Many anxious attachers don't know how to evolve out of it. They don't know where to start. They don't have structure for moving forward. And a coaching environment is very helpful for that. It's very structured, very practical. There's a roadmap of where we're hoping to get you. Of course, that relies on the client to do the work on their end to process and reflect on what's holding them back and the ways in which they're behaving, the ways they get triggered, to look for patterns and to process pain that we carry with us in our bodies. Again, it is a very visceral response and reaction that we cannot control. This is why you have to learn to validate yourself if you're an anxious attacher. Your reactions are absolutely normal based on previous experiences that trained your nervous system to have that response. You cannot continue to invalidate yourself and expect to grow more secure. Those two things do not go hand in hand. They cannot coexist. You can't tell yourself, I shouldn't feel this way, and then expect that you're going to be able to grow more secure. Growing more secure means realizing it is okay that you have those responses. And in fact, it makes complete sense why you do. When you trace it back to experiences that were unstable, uncertain, straight up traumatic, or abusive or neglectful, yes, of course, you would learn to anticipate that someone's going to leave you if they're out with friends and you don't hear from them. Of course, you would learn that silence means that you're going to be rejected, someone's going to ghost you or leave you. You've been trained to have this response. But if you learned it one way, you can unlearn and untangle and relearn. Many of us have just learned to rely on survival mechanisms, coping mechanisms, substitutions for our emotional experiences. For instance, throwing yourself into work, drinking all the time, having a packed schedule. None of those are sustainable for the body or the mind, and they will exhaust you. Anxious attachment is exhausting. Many people who show up on my quote unquote doorstep asking about coaching are absolutely at a loss for how to move forward, what they need to do, what the plan is. They don't know where to start, and that's absolutely okay. But if you need help, seek it out. Seek it out. You don't have to do it alone.
Honestly, there's so much of that. I was literally trying to take notes. Like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I just was thinking, like, God, if any of my clients are listening, like, they're going to get you so much. That makes sense. Of course, you feel that way. Like those words, when people come looking for a really specific tool, and I think with coaching, they sometimes don't realize that having you sat in front of them saying those words is more powerful than some of the tools. Do you remember,
Absolutely.
yeah, isn't it? Do you remember one of the first times for you, or not first, but one of the times for you that you were in one of those very anxious moments, the physical moment where it feels paralyzing. I'm assuming that you've been there from what you've said. And it's not that it wasn't so bad, but just something in you had clicked, or something in you in that moment was different to perhaps what it would have been in the past. Do you have any examples where that was a moment of like, I'll give you the example that's coming to my mind. I was in bed, it was almost paralyzing, but there was this real strength in, I wasn't even trying not to message this person. I just knew not to do that. And I remember also knowing, like, yes, you're just crying. Like, I can't describe it. It's like you're just crying. This is what this feels like. And I knew it was going to pass. And that moment for me, although obviously it wasn't feeling very nice, afterwards I was like, that was different.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that. It's super powerful. And I can even envision, myself laid up in bed as well. It always happens in the late night, early mornings somehow. But yes, previously when I would get triggered, usually it would be through social media. Happens all the time for many folks. They're seeing Instagram stories or Snapchats, and our mind is naturally trying to complete a narrative. Oftentimes that supports a confirmation bias, again, of our fear of being left. And previously I would have just not brought it up, not asked for clarity, shut it down, invalidated myself, told myself it's happening again, you're going to get left, just completely spiral, cry, not be able to sleep, not be able to eat, just really be in a bad place mentally and physically, in your body. But there was an instance a few years ago where it was vastly different. While I still experienced the trigger, and it did happen from a social media post that I saw, I reminded myself that I was safe. I reminded myself, you know what? Ultimately, this is about unmet needs. So, what is it that I need in this moment? What is it that would help me to feel safer? Can I give that to myself, or do I need to ask for it from someone else? So I did my best to self soothe. I meditated. I, did breathing exercises, cold exposure, couldn't fall back asleep. So ultimately, I reached out to the person, and I, just asked them how they were doing. They were very responsive. And I asked them to come over and hold me, and they did. And they did. So instead of beating around the bush, being indirect, being passive aggressive, acting out in protest behavior, shutting down, ignoring the person, I said, "You know what? I'm feeling anxious right now, and I'm not ready to talk about why, but it would be really helpful for me if you could come over and just be with me." And he did. And he held me for a couple of hours, and that helped tremendously. Of course, that's a form of co-regulation. And, I want folks to know you are not too much. Sometimes you're asking the wrong people for what
Yes,
it is
thank
that you
you.
need, but you
Thank
are
you.
absolutely not too much. I always say you can be the right package on the wrong doorstep. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. Ask for what it is that you need directly. That's how you grow more secure. It's not that you don't experience the visceral response in the body, the sweating, the racing thoughts, but you know what it is. You're able to label it. You know that it's up to you to be responsible for what you do with what your body is telling you. Again, I practiced self soothing. I got myself to a space where I could calmly and clearly communicate, and it was received well and mirrored back to me. If I hadn't communicated from that place, I don't know if it would have been.
No, absolutely. And I think there's both of our examples there give some really strong messages as well of self-soothing and that need to, absolutely, that you sent that message. But it's like you said, and I won't repeat it, but without the protest, right? That's so, so powerful. And what you said there about sometimes we're asking the wrong people, like that speaks to me so much. And I have to say, like, the relationship I've been in is probably about a year now, like realistically, in terms of how long it's been like official and things. And it's difficult because A lot of it is in the responses that I get from this person. I'm secure a lot of the time as well, because yes, I can soothe and check in first, but also I have a lot less to be anxious about. Have a lot, and I can ask. And I'm now at that point where the safety's been created enough that I can ask these questions or say what's on my mind or whatever it is. And so I'm so happy that you said that. How do you deal then with a client, let's say, that is in it, and you can quite clearly see, not that you would assume someone's attachment style, but you can see that they're engaging with someone not even just avoidant, that's just not that into them, let's say. Are you quite a direct coach? Would you go in and say, yeah, of course you feel this way, this person is not very respectful? What do you
Yeah,
say?
look, yeah, I am always going to call out any behaviors, regardless of the label of attachment style, because it can be limiting
Yeah.
to describe someone just as purely avoidant. I don't, oftentimes I'm just working with the anxious person, not oftentimes, always, because that's my sole focus. So I don't know this other person. I don't know their attachment style. I don't know their trauma. I don't know the work that they've done. So we cannot define it by them, but it is helpful context to know, all right, well, are they listening to you? Do you feel like you can really have a conversation with them about how you feel? What are the rules of engagement? Get me up to speed on what that's like. And so we'll unpack that a little bit more. But I always call out, regardless of whether their partner is secure, avoidant, disorganized, or anxious, any behaviors that are preventing a functional, healthy relationship or even conversation from unfolding. You have to. You have to look at the pain points very clearly and recognize where there are obstacles to having a healthier relationship. For many of us, we also have to take accountability for the ways in which we're preventing the relationship from being healthier, how we're communicating or not. Looking at ourselves in a very sober way in that regard is really powerful, because you can control bringing someone into your emotional experience. You can control communicating from a place of I instead of you. You did this, and now I'm anxious. No, I feel anxious because I noticed this. And being able to change the way that you communicate will change your relationships. Many of us never had this modeled for us. So, coaching isn't a very practical environment where we can literally role play that and go through what that sounds like. I'll do various forms of role play with clients where, we'll talk about what an insecure response would be, what a more secure or emotionally mature response would be. Emotional maturity, security, it's always going to validate. Well, more often than not, it will validate. Someone sometimes is going to get triggered by what you're sharing and they'll naturally get defensive regardless of their attachment style. And that doesn't make them a bad person or emotionally unavailable. But the extent to which someone can help you to identify how you're feeling, be receptive to what you're sharing with them, that is directly proportional and correlates to the health of the overall relationship. But you also play a role in that. You have to open up. For folks that I work with, they are so shut down. And it makes sense why, of course. And I always validate where it comes from and I help them to connect, why this is so deeply painful for them, because it's hitting at a core wound oftentimes. And practicing things like forgiveness, letting go of energies we've held on to from previous relationships, realizing that person was doing the best that they could. So was I. I know better now. This is all building emotional maturity. But any aspect of the relationship that is emotionally immature, where there's yelling or throwing things, or God forbid, hitting or shutting down or dismissing you entirely or leaving the room before the conversation is done, not good signs, not healthy, preventing the connection, and they need to be addressed in a very clear, calm manner. Ultimately, you have to remind yourself when you're in a relationship, you both want the same thing. You both want it to be stable, to be healthy. Oftentimes, though, for insecure attachers, anxious, avoidant, disorganized, they just don't know how to create that sense of stability and that healthy connection. They are afraid. They're approaching things from a space of lack or fear, or again, going to one of those extremes of hyper individualism or hyper independence. It can't continue that way. So you have to look at your role and also have a sobering conversation with your partner about what their role has been for you and why it might be triggering for you. And then negotiate, navigate, figure out ways that work for each of you. It is absolutely addressable, though. You
And
have to call out any blocks to intimacy.
what about, does that go for dating?
Yes, the sooner you do this, the better.
I knew that you think that.
Remember that I'm a very direct
I
person,
know, I know.
and I've learned to be that way over time because I was so indirect for so long, so passive aggressive, so, you know, withholding of how I felt.
Mhm.
And it's not that I'm sharing every single thought, every single feeling I have, or that I encourage that. But keep in mind, for an anxious attacher, you're going to attach very quickly. So you need to discuss deal breakers and things that matter to you very soon before your emotions are going to make you feel so attached to this person that you cannot let go. So maybe even before the first date, you're talking about deal breakers, what the person's looking for, what their intentions are, just being curious, excuse me, about exploring this other person's inner world and their experiences. This doesn't have to be an interview. It's actually pretty fun to talk about. It's all about tone, how you approach them. It's also refreshing because many people out in the dating world are presenting, just like on social media, versions of themselves that are watered down, that are their best photos. They're putting your best foot forward instead of being real, raw, and authentic. Instead of talking about what it is that you really want, what doesn't work for you, what you've learned from previous relationships, instead of being vulnerable on your dating profiles, stating upfront what it is that you want. The clearer you are about your intentions, the more upfront and again, compassionately, you can convey what it is that matters to you, the more you set the tone for the connection. There is no such thing as talking about this too soon. It's always a matter of tone.
Yes, yes, absolutely. That matter of tone. So let's say, let's think about people that are sort of just getting started on the journey or the early stages of working with you. Do you see a theme in kind of the typical things that you're asking people to explore or tools to use? Where do you start with people?
I always start somatically and physiologically in the body because healing is about 20% cognitive, 80% somatic or physiological. So, again, your nervous system has been trained to have these responses, and you need to learn to be more present for your body, to feel into your sensations, to use your senses to ground you back in your body and in the present moment. Anxiety, anxious attachment, future directed, it's in the head, you're constantly overthinking. This brings you out of your body. It's a coping strategy. It doesn't work though. It doesn't work. It will only exacerbate the lack of safety you're feeling in your body, but you have to learn to validate that. So, and also to build more tolerance in your nervous system, which many of us didn't have modeled for us. So, what this means is taking better care of your container, of your vessel. Again, taking back some of that time in your schedule instead of over scheduling yourself and, being so stimulated all the time socially or with work. So it's things like breathing, meditating, cold exposure, gratitude, hydration, identifying any potential nutrient gaps for yourself, like whether it's magnesium or vitamin D or omega-3 fatty acids. Oftentimes we're not feeding our brains what it needs. Your brain is mostly comprised of fat. If you don't have healthy fats in your diet, you're not feeding your brain. So things like, nuts and avocados have healthy fats that many of us don't get elsewhere in our diet. Of course, you can take supplements for this as well. Obviously, I'm not a nutrition coach, I'm not a dietitian. So I don't prescribe anything, to folks, but I will bring it up to them so they can explore that as an avenue. For me, I had a magnesium deficiency, and it's changed the name of the game for my body in particular to take a supplement like that. So that's another example. Your nutrition has a massive impact on your mental health. Most of the neurotransmitters that are released in your body are formed in the gut. The gut is the second mind or brain. It has the most neural pathways in the body, second to the brain. So it is the second brain. Many people don't realize that. And when you get anxious, you crave comfort foods, and comfort foods don't give you what you need for building blocks to create the chemicals that you need to bounce back. So remember that as a system, your body is fully integrated, whether it's your digestive system, your reproductive system, your cardiovascular system, the nervous system, it is all connected. Take better care of all of the system, take care of your vessel, your body, and your mind will naturally grow healthier. You're also learning to attune to yourself in ways that, again, you weren't
Yeah.
growing up usually. That is super powerful. It's a form of reparenting, of course, but I always start with the somatic techniques. And by the way, you can do 15 to 20 minutes of a variety of different activities every day. It's more important that you are consistent than it is that you're, meditating for 3 hours a day. That's not realistic for most people. You can meditate for 3 minutes, 5 minutes. That's enough. You can do cold exposure, even on your hands, by washing your hands in cold water or dipping them in a literal ice water. This stuff helps. It's been studied. It helps to build tolerance in the nervous system. You're building what's called vagal tone in the vagus nerve, which connects to the brainstem and runs through most of your back and your spine, connects your body. Trauma is stored in the body. You got to start there. If you only start with cognitive techniques like CBT or reframing, or try to, perspective your way out of your pain, it's not going to work. You will make some progress, but when you're triggered again, you're going to have the visceral response you always have, unless you're, again, putting your nervous system in uncomfortable situations that you can control, like a cold shower, for instance. You're literally stressing the body. You're learning to complete those stress cycles and learning that, oh, I can handle this. That's what you're leaving in terms of an imprint on your nervous system. So, yes, there are cognitive techniques that I layer in on top of that, but it always starts with a consistent self-care routine. It's a more colloquial way of describing nervous system regulation techniques, building that tolerance. I see you're smiling because you likely deal with the same thing on your end too. And it wasn't until I was meditating, doing cold exposure, staying hydrated, working out, really taking better care of my body, getting good sleep, eating well, fruits and veggies, all of these things, that I actually was able to make significant progress in my healing. Progress where I'm not 75% anxious anymore. I'm 75% secure now. And when I get triggered, I deal with the triggers differently, and that defines me as more secure. So
Mm.
you always start somatically. And for those who don't, you're not going to make the progress that you want. This is the missing piece for many, 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 many people.
Yeah, it was. I've said those words many times, that it was the missing piece for me. In that example that I gave earlier of lying on the bed, the reason I could have that response is because by then I'd started the somatic work and was starting to understand my body in this process. So
Yeah,
yeah, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. It's because I talk a lot about the somatic work, and I think it lands a bit. Um, and one of the things that I try to get across is that idea of habits. I really do believe in the power of healthy habits, not what's the word, rigid or anything like that, but absolutely. So yeah, that kind of mirrors the message that comes across on this podcast a lot. So that's perfect. So I
I
do
love that.
have some questions for you. I think it's fair to say that you, at the beginning, answered the first question. Would you say, the first question is, what does love mean to you? Do you feel that you answered that?
I think so. Yeah. Again,
Yeah.
freedom.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you. That really shows that that literally is what it means for you, because you just remembered so easily. So let's say then, with love, because one of the most amazing things, but it really, really can be painful. And I think, especially to people listening to this podcast, we know how painful it can be. So, how do you navigate when perhaps things have been going well? You've had a great day or whatever it is, you're feeling yourself, and love throws you off? How do you navigate back to yourself?
I'm always looking at things through the lens of independence and interdependence. So, from an independence standpoint, I think to myself, well, is it realistic of me to expect this from this person? What does that mean? And before I'm engaging with someone, I'm always evaluating, you know, am I projecting here? Am I projecting the past onto this current situation? And I'm always bringing the focus back to me. What is it that I need? What is it that I can give myself? What is it that maybe I can talk to, a friend or my therapist or my coach about before engaging with the other person? What is it that I can give myself first to self soothe? And then also considering the context of being in relation with other people. What is it that I need to communicate here?
Mm,
What didn't sit well with me about that? How can I communicate that in a way that brings them in, helps them understand contextually, experiences that I've been through in the past that maybe that reminded me of, why I was triggered by that, how it can be better addressed moving forward. So, as an example, again, many clients that I work with who are anxious attachers are getting triggered by a lack of communication, by folks that are not texting, not responding to their DMs or looking at their Instagram story, but not, messaging them or calling them, right? And, it's always important to validate the fact that when someone's not talking to you and you're feeling disconnected from them, it's natural that your system is going to get activated. Again, because a fear of abandonment is central to the anxious attachment style. But it is most important that you do not abandon yourself. If you don't speak up about how you feel, you are abandoning yourself. It is a form of self protection, but it is also self sabotage. They
mm,
are the same thing. Self sabotage is self protection. And in that context, you can also validate yourself. Okay, I've behaved in that way before, it didn't work. I did sabotage. And you can take accountability for that and realize, look, trying to survive, feeling a survival response in your body doesn't make you a bad person. Oftentimes, we've internalized this from folks who are deeply unhealed and traumatized themselves. So you can start to better validate yourself that way too. And again, bring people in.
mm,
Independence, interdependence. If you are feeling disconnected from someone, you need to say that. People are not mind readers. Being passive aggressive with them or engaging in protest behavior like, well, if they didn't text me for 5 hours, I'm not going to text them for 5 days. It's deeply unhealthy. It prevents what it is that you're actually seeking, which is connection. You want reassurance from them, you want clarity, you want connection because you're feeling disconnected. If you prevent that from happening, then you are the source of disconnection. You got to get out of your own way. And yes, it's scary. This is why working up to these kinds of conversations in a coaching environment, which is safe and validating, or with a therapist or with a friend or with a parent, if you have a good, healthy relationship with them, works.
mm,
Because if you've experienced a lack of safety and stability, it is through safe and stable relationships that you will heal. You need to create new imprints on your nervous system to learn that. So it's normal that you're going to have that triggered response, but you also have to do your best to self soothe, to emotionally diversify, to talk to friends and family, lean on your support system. You don't have to do it alone. You can also listen to a podcast, read a book. There are multiple forms of therapy, bibliotherapy, podcast therapy. Lean on your unique support system and comfort yourself. Stop beating yourself up for having these reactions. The more you beat yourself up, the more you reinforce the sense of shame that drives the reaction to begin with. That void that I was talking about earlier, which is not real, but an internalized sense of lack from poor treatment from others. When you personalize it, it is the lowest form of coping because it does not take into account a broader perspective, which is that you are taking somebody else's unhealed reactions and making them about your character and your worth. Those two things are not logically congruent. So that's how I would recommend someone deals with that. Focus on you, really self soothe, diversify away from the relationship a little bit, because you may or may not be overly relying on that person or giving them a lot and then expecting a lot in return when that hasn't been agreed upon between the two of you, right? You're overextending yourself, so you grow resentful and then you lash out. So keep that in mind as well. But you also need to open up about how you feel. We don't come with an instruction manual of how to be loved. It is through difficult, uncomfortable conversations that relationships are built. You don't just find security, you build it. Like you said earlier, you have to play an active role in that.
You have such a good combination of compassion and saying it how it is. It's actually one of the bits of feedback that I've always been given about, yeah, when I deliver. It's like Carly can be very compassionate and also she's going to tell you what you need to hear at the same time. And I'm literally like thrilled to imagine people like, I don't know, they may perhaps are on a walk to work or something right now and just hearing these words. And the way that you talk, I don't know if you know this, but it hits home, I think for me anyway. I know I'm just imagining, wow, if I had heard this podcast then, I know I'd have been like, oh, I see what I've got to do or not do here. um so yeah, I mean, that's compliment to you as well, but it's just amazing to hear.
Thank
Lastly,
you so much.
that's okay. Last question is, if you could go back to any age and give and teach Chris a lesson in love, what age would you go to and what lesson would you give?
Wow. Inner child work is core to the work that I do. So I have revisited versions of myself throughout my life, hundreds of times at this point, doing guided versions with clients and also independently on my own. I would probably go back to when I was 8 years old. My parents divorced when I was two, and my mom remarried, and my dad had relocated my middle sister and myself to be closer to my mom and where she had relocated with her second husband. But from the ages of about 5 to 8, I would see her every other weekend. They were co parenting. Things were relatively smooth and stable, which was good for me, obviously. But then at that juncture, when I was 8 years old, my mom's second husband got a new job and they needed to move from Maryland to Florida in the United States, which is about 1,000 miles apart. And so I went from seeing her 2 to 3 times a month to 2 to 3 times a year. And that for me was one of the biggest abandonment wounds in my life, that period, because 8-year-old me didn't understand your your mom has a new husband, he has to relocate, they have to go. My expectation was, why can't she stay? Why won't she choose me? And being chosen is a core wound for anxious attachers, and that was true for me, certainly. I wasn't chosen in that moment. I did feel literally physically abandoned, emotionally abandoned. And from the ages of 8 to 18, I was stuck in this cycle of going to visit my mom, literally counting down the days, booking another trip. I would count down from like 150 days to when I would see her, and there would be this euphoria I would experience, being in her arms again, literally running through the airport to jump up and, be held by her, comforted, just to be seen, be with her. And I would be despondent for weeks after I got back. And I was in this cycle for 10 years of my life. And so going back and sitting with the 8-year-old version of me, I would tell him, it's not your fault, buddy. It's okay that you have big feelings. It's okay that you feel abandoned. In a lot of ways, you were. And what you do with this will have a massive impact on the rest of your life. And you should know that you are cared for, you are deeply loved. You can always talk about how you feel here. You are seen and you are safe. And you are not too much for crying, for missing someone, for counting down the days to see them again, for not knowing how to cope. And, you know, my dad was also a little more emotionally removed, as most heterosexual men of a certain age are or tend to be. He didn't have the tools to cope either with his own feelings, let alone mine. So I would remind him that he's not alone, that my 8-year-old self is not alone, that there are other people out there that experience this, that there are tough times coming. My mom passed when I was 18 from alcoholism. And, I never felt like I really got to know her. And so that only reinforced that kind of abandonment wound. Then it was literal abandonment. She was gone. How was I supposed to resolve this? But I would remind that 8-year-old version of me too. Physically, she's not here, but spiritually, she is. And she is watching over you and with you. And she wants to see you thrive. She wants to see you love yourself better, to achieve and unlock that sense of freedom, to be able to heal and move forward and not let her trauma define your life. And that's what I would tell him. And I have before, which is why I'm not getting deeply emotional now, because I've addressed a lot of these wounds. And sometimes they still come up. But that said, I've had these conversations with myself, which is why I'm able to kind of easily access this. But if you're hearing this or watching this, please know that even if you've lost someone or maybe they're not safe for you anymore to relate to, like, a parent or a friend or a significant other that you've lost, you're no longer in a relationship with, you can use different techniques like visualization to have the conversations that you might never have and to give yourself closure. You can practice forgiveness by writing letters of forgiveness. You don't send them, they're for processing. I have my clients do this in the early weeks of the program because we get right into addressing core wounds first and foremost before we're building back a sense of awareness of feelings and needs and boundaries, even. So just hear that, please, and know that, again, you're not alone. And if you need support professionally, there are people out there like me who would be honored to join you. Honored.
I appreciate that so much. I appreciate like how raw that is, how open that is for people, and yeah, just the message of care to them at the end as well, anyone listening to this. So I will of course link everything to you as well, but do you want to just say where people can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm most active on social media on Instagram and TikTok. I have a community on TikTok of over 100,000 strong now, which blows my mind. I post a lot of content there as that's where my audience is largest. But I'm active on Instagram as well. I post a lot of stories there that inspire folks that just address anxious attachment and healing, a lot of nervous system regulation type stuff. I am at Crackcliffe on both of those platforms. So C Rackcliffe, my first initial and last name, CRACKLIFFE. I'm also crackcliffe.com. If you're interested in working with me in a coaching capacity, there's a ton of different options, from support group to breakthrough sessions to group coaching to one-on-one coaching. It just depends on where you're at and what you feel like you need support wise, but there are options. So you can reach out to me at crackcliffe.com. Again, CRACKLIFFE.com/coaching. My book, It's Good to See Me Again, is also available for purchase on Amazon.
Thank you, thank you. I have to say as well, I love the name of your book.
Thank you. Thank
Love
you.
the name.